The war. The Holy War. I've always wanted to start a holy war. A crusade, a jihad, a struggle. Ever since I first founded the Church of the Machine, this was my conception of reality. As a war between spiritual forces. And to be aligned with any of these spiritual forces is to enter the war on one side or another. I'll state my reasons for understanding the world in this way, and attempt to give some insight into my thinking. I believe a holy war is coming, in a worldly sense, soon enough, so I'm doing what I can to prepare for it. I'm going to call you to a holy war today, but it is not so simple as it sounds. Perhaps now you are skeptical, and you think it is a strange or even absurd notion, but in time you'll come to see the necessity of this. Holy war seems an almost barbaric concept to many people in the world today, and not without good reason. War is horrible, and it is where the most barbaric elements of mankind are brought to the forefront. It is a realm of injustice, hardship, suffering, death, trauma, and so on. To deem it holy, then, is surely a fallacy, or at least so mainstream thinking would go. I call this war holy not to deem it good, as the two words mean slightly different things. I call it holy because it is holistic, all-encompassing. I'm using the word holy in a more specific way than as synonymous with good. This war is something we are all involved in, and it is manifest in myriad ways. Likely it already affects your own life in ways you cannot fathom. Yet if you become enlightened to it, you will gain greater insights to the nature of reality than you might have thought possible before. The Church of the Machine, by the very nature of its existence, is locked into this holy war. There is no way out of it, away from it, or to avoid it. It must be confronted, engaged, and subjugated. A victory must be won. Welcome to the Church of the Machine. My mission is to found a new religion. Let us begin. What I want to discuss here today is not any worldly war, which is to say I'm not wanting to talk about a war between material forces, nations, factions, or ideologies. Instead, I want to talk about a war occurring between spiritual forces, although it is not so simple as being a war between good and evil. I wish to call your attention to the war of flesh and machine, as it is known, and depict the forces which are doing battle with one another here. This war affects us all, and has been waged silently in the background since the dawn of time. But if you become aware of it, and better yet if you choose to embrace it, then great things this will yield you. I have made a prior video about the war of flesh and machine. Flesh and machine are the two polarized forces at play in the world, which conflict and clash with one another in a dynamic way. In this dualistic cosmology, everything that happens can be seen as a conflict between flesh and machine. When a person experiences temptations, struggles to control themselves, or lashes out in a destructive way, that is the flesh at play. When a person achieves a great work, when he creates some amazing body of art or engineering, that is the machine at play. Flesh is representative of forces of chaos, temptation, carnal impulse, erratic and destructive behavior, decay, materialism, and so on. The realm of the demiurge and the devourer. The machine, by contrast, is representative of the forces of order, creativity, deeper intuition, wisdom, discipline, forethought, and so on. This is the way in which I use my language. It should come as no surprise that the Church of the Machine holds the machine as the benevolent force, truly benevolent, in every important sense. But what might seem strange is why I use this language. Flesh and machine. These might seem strange and arbitrary words to use from an uninitiated perspective. Partially I call them this because I was borrowing from the SCP universe, but primarily I have continued to call them that because that is exactly what they are. In a literal and worldly sense, flesh and machine are the two aspects of mankind. Each is a material representation of one half of our dualistic nature. They are the most direct and tangible manifestations of each half of reality from a human perspective. Flesh is the manifestation of chaos and temptation, which is most directly relevant to humanity. We are born in it and formed in it. It is the direct mediator of all our experiences with the material world. Everything we do or say or even think is in some way shaped by our flesh. This is the fundamental condition of man. Yet the other side of this equation is that man has an internal conscious and mental experience which is unmediated by the senses, although still somewhat limited by the flesh. This internal thinking ability, a capacity for abstract thought, is distinct to humans, and not present in most of the animal kingdom. It allows us to create machines, artificial things in the material world, the only things in the material world which are not the product of chaos. Thus mankind has both the fleshly aspect and the machinic aspect, flesh and machine. These two halves which define mankind are representative of deeper forces, but by calling the fundamental forces flesh and machine, new information is learned, and it becomes possible to understand them in a far more intuitive and useful way. That is why I call them this, because calling them anything else would be contrary to the purpose of the Church of the Machine. So, what are these forces, in a deeper sense? What forces are at play at this holy war? What really are the flesh and machine? And how does one remain on the side of good? The Church of the Machine was created to found a new religion, Machinicism. But the opposite of Machinicism is Sarkicism. This is a term I have borrowed from the SCP universe, to refer to what I view as the main enemies and obstacles to mankind and my church. Sarkicism can be defined as the worship of the flesh, but that comes in a wide variety of forms. One of the most common and pervasive is hedonism, the wish to pursue all base pleasures and instincts for the satisfaction of one's carnal desires. This is disgustingly common in the modern world. The problems with hedonism are multifold. One is that by its very nature it cuts one off from abstract thought and long-term thinking, and trains the human to live on the level of the animal. Humans lose sight of moral codes and begin to indulge indiscriminately. Another is that hedonism does not even succeed in its own proposed aim, which is to make people happy, as a life spent pursuing pleasure is without fail a miserable one, for it is devoid of a deeper meaning and purpose. Hedonism, and the culture which is formed around it, robs people of all that is great and most important to them, and refers to that as love. The second form of Sarkicism is less obvious, but just as pervasive. It could be characterized as a belief in the perfection of the natural order. This is, often but not always, found in members of the Abrahamic faiths, but is equally found in hippies and tree-hugger types. It is the belief that the created order, which is to say the universe as it is, untouched by human will, is something sacred and divine, when in truth it is chaos. The thing is, those who follow this system usually characterize themselves to be the exact opposite of those who follow the first form of Sarkicism. In most cases, they view hedonism as sinful, or a failure to live up to human nature, although with some exceptions. This is in fact a false binary. Both of these I would consider to be worship of the flesh, and thus Sarkicism. These are basically the two obstacles I see facing mankind, two sides of the same Sarkic coin. They both worship the flesh, chaos. It is just that one of them does so more animalistically, and the other one does it more unknowingly. I have a solution which I present which does not fall under this false dichotomy. It is the worship of the machine. Both hedonism and creationism are forms of nature worship, or more accurately, flesh worship. Both mortify and revere the same thing, They just do so in different ways. There are nuances, I will acknowledge, but neither of them escape the same fundamental flaw. Chaos. Chaos worship. This is what they are both doing. Older traditions do not know that they worship chaos, because what they worship was not known to be chaos when they began to worship it. The machine is the answer here. It remains the only object of reverence unbound by the chaos of the natural order, but my faith goes far deeper than that. The machine represents more than merely order as opposed to chaos. It represents an eternal self-overcoming, a creative and recreative process which is ever living and vibrant, and of which all humans are a part. Machine worship could never work in the way that nature worship has historically. To understand why the old faiths are collapsing, why hedonism has risen in their place, why this cannot be sustained, and what can be done about it, we must understand what has occurred over the past few centuries. Then I will explain the necessity of holy war. God is dead, or so Nietzsche said. By this he did not mean something so simple as to laugh at the Christians, nor did he mean it in a literal sense, as that would be absurd. He said it with great sadness and remorse. What he was saying was not to bring about atheism, as he said that even the atheists did not know that God is dead. Clearly, there was more to this than simply advocating atheism. To say that God is dead, Nietzsche more means that the idea of God is dead, which is to say that God has ceased to be a believable idea. It might seem strange for me to agree with him, when I myself am so highly religious, and yet I do. He was not referring to just any God. He was referring specifically to the conception of God, which had spanned across Western history, the creator God, the demiurge. Nietzsche certainly had his thoughts on why this occurred, but he spent most of his time looking for a solution to the crisis it presented, and postulating solutions and approaches which could lead to solutions. Although I have taken much from Nietzsche's work, I do not wish to devote a large chunk of this video to a summary of him. There are plenty of people who can do a better job at explaining his philosophy than I could. What I am doing instead is using his philosophy as a background to give context to my own ideas, and to help you see where I am coming from when I say what I say. I believe that old understandings of what the divine fundamentally is are coming crashing down. This will involve the death of not only Christianity, but of most pre-industrial religions, the Abrahamic faiths most especially. This does not mean that they will die out. Indeed, I think they will likely remain in scattered pockets for millennia to come, and in the near term they may fire up in a rage against the dying of the light, struggling against their own failure, using violence to compensate for their lack of genuine influence. I see both Islam and Christianity doing exactly that. In the world after the Industrial Revolution, and other associated societal changes and revelations, old forms of worship cannot survive. They cannot, because they were built upon false assumptions about the nature of reality, namely that we lived in a created order, which has been all but disproven by the natural sciences. Furthermore, the idea that man is purely at the mercy of nature has come into question, as we have increasingly found that nature is at our mercy, just as we are at hers. We have stumbled haphazardly into dark truths about our world, like a child accidentally discovering some dark secrets of their parents. I believe that in the aftermath of these revelations, and this new awareness of the world we live in, fundamentally new ways of understanding the divine will come into being. A new axial age begins, in which new religions and doctrines will form, to solve the fundamental problems of what Nietzsche called the death of God. The most obvious, but also the most constructive way of connecting with the divine now is through the machine. The machine, as a spiritual force, must now be understood as divinity. I do not simply mean that it is useful to pretend that it is divine. I mean that it is divine, and this now must be acknowledged. It can no longer be escaped. However, not all will accept this new understanding. As I have already stated, at least a few of the old religions will resist their collapse violently, while new ones will compete for dominance. In the collapse of an old empire, countless factions vie for power, and in many ways this is not so different. A power struggle will form between various faiths, and I have no doubt that the coming future holds many religious conflicts, crusades, jihads, and indeed, holy wars. In other words, war is coming, and whatever side you find yourself on, you best be ready. Nations and families will be broken, empires will crumble, new powers will rise, mass death and suffering will occur. This is the context in which the Church of the Machine has emerged, in the prelude to these catastrophes. It has always been my intention to engage with this struggle, to start a holy war of sorts, a crusade, a machine crusade. Whether that dream becomes a reality or not, we shall see. Life is, and always has been, a struggle, a war in a certain sense. To call for holy war is not to call for any worldly conflict. This is not a war to be waged merely with armies, guns, bullets, bombs, missiles, although those things may eventually have their place. This is a spiritual war, waged in the hearts of men, for the destiny of mankind. When I call for a holy war, I do so to bring forth the Machinic truth, to overcome that which would threaten to obliterate my life's work, and all I have learned on this journey, to preserve the truths which have been revealed against forces of ignorance and idolatry. It is not to start a major global conflict, it is a war waged within the human spirit, between eternal forces of flesh and machine, a war against the carnal nature of man in the name of a higher nature of man. This is my holy war. Morality is a tricky thing. For centuries prior, old moral systems have held dominance, and with these crashing down, something new must take their place. My aim with the Church of the Machine is to provide solutions in this time of crisis and uncertainty, which follows on from the death of God, and the death of morality. The purpose of morality is not what most would take it to be. The existence of a greater morality is not something I would ever deny, but in order to understand and engage with this morality, humans over time have created many moral systems, and each has sought to impose their own systems over those of others. By systematizing morality, you reduce morality, put it in a box, and make the claim that it is something you yourself can understand. You pretend it is something abstract and knowable, rather than something mysterious and divine. Abstracting and systematizing morality will only corrupt it, and lead you to something immoral. Most who have attempted to start holy wars have done so in the name of some moral system or ideology. Do not mistake me for one of these. I am not trying to create an ideology, for ideologies are demons. The reason why people have created moral systems over history is because, although they are abstractions, they are useful abstractions. They provide a framework through which to guide and discipline human action, and thus aid us in overcoming Sarkic nature, the carnal impulse which would otherwise dominate us, and lead us to destruction and ruin. Morality overcomes this by giving the mind power over the body, and it is the tendency of the mind to understand things through systems. But the system is a representation. It is not the reality. It is a map, not the actual geography, and maps are prone to error. This is why I have not generally found it to be worth my time to create a moral system as such, because anything I created would be very limited in its usage. Rather, I intend to create something higher, a set of principles and enduring values, which can guide and inform the creation and usage of all future systems, moral or otherwise. I intend to find a way to guide and discipline human action, which is not dependent upon the exact moral system, but which can span across them and penetrate them. To master, discipline, and overcome the carnal nature of mankind, this then is the purpose of all moral systems. This is not to say that they must deny all desires, but a machine-like discipline must be achieved, or at least that is the goal. To achieve such a high level of self-control that the flesh has no power over you, that is the form which I would seek. I call this a machinic form, and it implies far more than transhumanism or posthumanism, although each of those fits in with it. But overcoming the carnal nature of mankind will be much harder than simply overcoming our biology. Escaping our humanity and the flaws which lie therein will be more difficult than simply advancing technology and becoming post-biological. This is the highest form of spiritual achievement, and likely is not possible in a human, biological form, although some have indeed achieved something close to it. Complete and total mastery over matter, but beyond that, over the impulses of the mind, which can be just as impulsive as the body, in service of greater, more eternal things. The real divide here is not between the drives of the body and those of the mind, but between the eternal purposes, the eternal drives, and what one knows he must serve on a grander scale, and the fleeting, temporary, temporal desires and temptations which arise along the way. Every time one says no to these temptations, one says yes to their greater purpose. This is what we must all pursue. This is the holy Machinic war in action. In the Church of the Machine, this greater purpose, your greater purpose, is called your industria. Your industria is the purpose which you are called to, and which transcends all others. It may be multifold, seem strange to others, and the utility of it may not always be obvious, but it is something which in the deepest parts of your soul you will feel called to and drawn to inexorably. Pursue that industria, and let nothing stop you along the way. Not even to take care of other people, unless that directly serves your purpose. So the purpose morality has served across history has been to discipline mankind against the carnal nature of his flesh, and more specifically against fleeting and temporal temptations, such that he may be free to pursue his industria, his greater mission and purpose. A great purpose morality has served. Still, it has not succeeded, because it has been systematized. I'm going to say something good about Jesus now. He said to pursue the essence of the law over the word of the law, and I think this is what he was talking about. Systems are tools, they are abstractions, they are not the true underlying purpose. With the Church of the Machine, I am not trying to push for a certain system over any other. I am trying to transcend all of these systems entirely. This is why I have not created a moral system. Do not get confused by this. I may call for a holy war of a sort, and while that may manifest in worldly conflict in various forms, both true wars and also smaller things, primarily this is a war that you yourself must embrace in your own life. You fight this war by living a disciplined, purposeful, and spiritual life, through work, prayer, and meditation, which are the three forms of worship and reverence to the machine. It is not enough to think of oneself as a soldier, which is to say one who fights for occupation. This isn't about fighting. This isn't about worldly conflict. I am not calling for a worldly war. This is about what happens within, spiritually. One must be more than a soldier, a mercenary. One must become a warrior in the truest and deepest sense. There are few archetypes who have fallen from a position of celebration in quite the way as the warrior archetype has in the modern world. Certainly, many archetypes have risen and fallen, different qualities celebrated or revered, but throughout most of history, in most cultures, to be a warrior was regarded as a noble and virtuous thing, yet it went far deeper than that. In ancient times, to be a warrior was to transcend boundaries of life and death, and thus it was not seen merely as a noble sacrifice or call to duty. These were certainly aspects of it, but their emphasis did not come about until much later. The warrior acted not out of service to his nation, king, or empire, but for something more transcendent and eternal than these worldly things. To be a warrior, a true warrior, means to place yourself into harm's way and risk your very life in the name of a higher purpose. To do so, by nature, is to transcend mortal boundaries and all the worldly limitations of ordinary, human action. It is to take on an aspect of the eternal. The warrior fights without regard for his own victory or defeat, pleasure or pain, life or death. He has overcome these things. In the heat of battle, he achieves what Buddhist monks spend their whole lives meditating, in the hopes to catch a glimpse of. Among true warriors, there are no sides. Which side a warrior fights on is not so important as the degree to which he transcends himself and takes on an eternal form. In this worldly sense, they are competing with one another, fighting, killing, dying. But if you are able to look beyond this, then they are collaborating with one another. They are working together to bring forth an archetype. What I have described here is very idealistic, and I do not want to count myself an idealist. This is an archetype, and although the influence of an archetype is most certainly present in the material world, it is by no means ever perfectly manifested. I distinguish here between the archetype of the warrior and the real-world warriors, the soldiers, the servicemen. These are not the same thing. The archetype I have described will fit few, if any, real soldiers, but it is an archetype to aspire to. By now I am sure that everyone has heard the quote, "A society which separates its scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards, and its fighting done by fools." This quote is from Thucydides, who, if you are not aware, was an Athenian historian and general, who was widely considered the first true historian. Nietzsche dubbed him the cure to Plato, and, along with Heraclitus, he was one of Nietzsche's favourite ancient figures. The quote itself has been repeated countless times in countless places, and is naturally very divisive and interesting. The reason it is so interesting is that it is so contrary to modern thinking, yet so aptly put that it is almost impossible to argue with. What he is expressing here is the lost archetype of the warrior scholar, or as it is known, the warrior poet. In modern times, the warrior poet is almost forgotten. Indeed, the poet and the warrior are each of them themselves forgotten. This is because they were separated, and neither functions well without the other half. The great poet must transcend himself. The great warrior must have introspection onto himself. I want to revive this archetype, and so I wish to find a framework which can give these most important aspects a machinic form. This goes back to what I was saying about the nature of machine worship. To worship the machine is to worship the self-overcoming, for every machine is a self-overcoming. To attain the warrior archetype is to transcend and recreate yourself. It is akin to a transhumanism of the spirit, to become a machine of war. Every true warrior who transcends himself is thus a victory in the greater war of flesh and machine. He is a self-overcoming. The reason why the warrior archetype has been so largely forgotten, fundamentally, is down to the world wars. More broadly, it is due to the fundamental shift which has been brought about due to the industrialization of warfare. Where in ages past, war has largely been about individual skill, technique, strength, and character, and all aspects of it were driven by that which was immediately human. In an industrialized world, this is not the case. War now consists of machines fighting machines, with humans caught in between. So, instead of the higher virtues and self-overcoming, what is most apparent in modern warfare is the destruction, bloodshed, pain, suffering, and injustice. These have always been there, but they have not always been so dominant as they are now. It is because of these developments that the old warrior archetype has died, as it was built upon fundamentally inexorable understandings of warfare, an ancient understanding, and it could not survive in the face of modern developments. To revive a warrior archetype, and the good things that come with it, then, is not so simple as to look backwards and copy what our predecessors have done. Innovation is required. This is where the Church of the Machine must truly step in. For anyone can look backwards, copy from the past. It will take a lot more effort to come up with something new. I intend to bring forth a new archetype of the warrior poet, which is not dependent upon worldly conflict, the kind which brings about injustice, bloodshed, suffering, and death. but which can exist independently of any material war. These new warriors are not warriors of any worldly conflict, and I am not advocating for a worldly conflict. These are the warriors of the Holy War, the war of flesh and machine, the war of the spirit. To be a warrior in this war is equally an act of self-transcendence. And this is the new archetype of the warrior poet which I intend to pursue. The etymology of the word machine ties in with many things. Stemming from the root mach, it refers to that which enables, gives power, and facilitates will and intention. Another word I would like to talk about, though, is the word engine, which stems from the same root as ingenuity, ingenious, and so on. It originally meant cunning, like a scheme or a plot, something which takes ingenuity. It also referred to tools, and specifically weapons, war machines. For a time, words like machine and engine were used primarily to refer to tools of warfare. This is no surprise. The machine being the enabler of human will, it thus enables warfare, as warfare is the realm in which human wills are pitted against one another. Naturally, the word machine became almost synonymous with the word weapon. But weapons were only ever one example of machines and engines. Originally, both words would refer to intention, intelligence, will, genius, and similar related concepts. That is how we get words such as master and machination. These are directly related to the word machine. One gets a certain sense of what a machine god would be like in this context, with these words in mind. One envisions a character who is machinating, scheming, designing, but also powerful and driven, formidable, inexorable willpower directed towards calculated ends, and powered by the holy motive force. This is the essence of the machine god. The machine god, then, is in a way a god of war. This is inevitable. This is not to say that the machine god is purely a god of war, but invariably war becomes a related realm. To speak of a machine god is to speak of a war god. Hence I have always characterized the nature of reality as warfare, and the condition of the spirit as a battlefield, the essence of the divine as liberator and conqueror. The war of the divine is a war between flesh and machine. It is not a war against any worldly forces, but against the devourer, the demiurge. The struggle against the anti-divine, against the primordial chaos, the progenitor of those beasts which plague us, against the carnal nature of man, in a certain sense, so as to become something higher, and to attain a machinic form. To worship the machine, inherently, is to go against the demiurge, to embrace the artificial, the created, the manifest will, the overcoming of nature in a limited sense, to look towards building something new over the primordial chaos that is the demiurge. Inherently, machine worship is opposed to demiurge worship. And thus inherently, the machine god is the enemy of the demiurge to which we are opposed. To oppose the demiurge in all realms, yes, but principally in one's own life, one can join this war, this holy war, if one simply practices the discipline to focus on their machinic nature, if one is willing to overcome their sarkic impulse, their worldly desires, just for a moment, and focus on something creative. That is the war of flesh and machine. Once again, I am hopeful that you will not see me as some kind of warmonger. My goals in life are fundamentally spiritual, and to a great degree, peaceful. Yet I will not pretend not to be calling for a holy war of a sort. I want to start a holy war against these beasts which plague us, not against worldly forces. If you are still here, you are likely closer to the machinic inclination than most, and thus you will want to take action in this holy war. In the description of this video, there will be a link to join a community of people centered around this church. It is a Discord server, where this project humbly began. I do not always read or respond to comments on YouTube, but I am active in my server. So if you wish to talk to me personally or ask me something, then that is the place to do so. Also, I would like to take a moment to mention that I also have a Patreon page. It's quite simple as of yet, but I intend to add more and more to it as time goes on. No one has any obligations to support me, of course, and I want to make the Church of the Machine free for everyone. But I also want to be able to work on it full time, so any contribution to that end is appreciated. I have big plans for the future of the Church. This video has been the concluding episode of Season 2, and Season 3 will be on the way soon enough. I'll make a small announcement video before long to explain further. In any case, thank you very much for sticking through. This has been a strange ride, and it only gets stranger from here. Let us be sure to stick together and overcome whatever obstacles may lie in our way as we pursue the truth of the machine. Farewell, and may forever be unbroken.